This time on KEI Fabrication. Hey folks, welcome back to the shop. I am in the process of fabricating a back brace for the 8.8 rear. I've cleaned the bench off. I had horizontal surface syndrome. In case you're not sure what that is, that's horizontal surface syndrome. Any flat surface just tends to gather stuff, and certainly was going on here. So what have I done? I have prepped this area here to weld the axle tube to the housing. I've prepped the area where the back brace is going to weld, and I've pulled the axles out. The reason why this bracket is on here is when the back brace comes in, I want to make sure that all the hardware and everything is going to clear these areas, so I'm going to leave that fixed up. Step one of the back brace, I've got 4x2 or 2x4 by 1/8 wall, and I'm going to cut it at an angle. I want this to be the axle end and this end to be towards the differential cover, and this will be where I build the foundation for the tubular bridge that's going to go from here to the other side that goes around the differential cover. So this is probably the longest thing in terms of fabrication, the longest time, because you're going to have to fit the taper. I've got to fit the notch around and make it come as far as I can, still miss the differential cover, so that'll come off, and then provide the foundation for the bridge. It's going to be a tubular bridge that goes from one side to the other with a through bolt. So when you accelerate and the housing kind of tries to flex, this will prevent it from bending and hopefully saving the internals here. So once the fabrication is done and the welding is all done, I'm going to put the alignment bar back in, get my axle ends completely aligned with the carrier bearings. Then I'm going to take the pinion out, put the new crush sleeve in, put the new pinion seal in, and clean the rear end out thoroughly of all metal filings and anything else that doesn't belong in there. And then I will reassemble their rear end with all the new parts and give it a good paint job, and then it's going in the truck permanently. Hide all the women and children. Alright, so I've got the two housing brace halves. I was able to get it out of one piece of tubing. We'll see how the fit for the first one goes, and if I make a mistake, I've got another piece of tubing over there in the wings waiting if I need it. So now it's a matter of just scribing and cutting and fine-tuning the fit and tacking it in place, get both sides tacked in place, and then I'll try working up the bridge that's going to go across the back of the differential cover. Alright folks, what I've done here is I've welded the axle tube to the housing, and I welded the spring perch to the housing on both sides. I TIG welded it, and it took quite a while. You know, it's about 3 hours worth of welding. It may sound like I was slacking off, but what I do is I rotate the rear end. I weld about an inch and a half, rotate the rear end, skip to the other side, back and forth, round and round, and that keeps the shrinkage to a minimum to try to get the rear end to stop from pulling. So I've got the driver's side back brace pretty much fabricated. It's ready to tack weld in, but I wanted to weld all these in before I covered them up with the back brace so that I knew that they were fully welded. And as I had mentioned a while back, because I'm using a back brace on a leaf spring rear end, I've got to build some bridges here for the U-bolts to go through, and I'll show you how that's going to work out in a few minutes. Alright folks, I finished welding up. Now before I go and weld the back brace on, I want to make sure that the rear end is close, and if anything, I got to kind of hold the camera like this to get it true to form. So what we can see here is that after the welding, the tube is way off. It pulled this way, which only makes sense because all the welding was concentrated on the bottom side, so it pulls in that direction. So I'm going to have to put some heat and shrink this in this direction. At the same time, I'm going to put some heat at the front of the axle tube to get it to pull towards the front of the vehicle, because when I put all that weld into it with the back brace, it's going to shrink back. So I'm going to kind of anticipate that. Kind of got the same amount of misalignment in a different direction on the other side, and I'm going to compensate for that now, and then keep an eye on it as the back brace goes on. That's the beauty of this alignment jig, is that you can really keep an eye on what the thing is doing and make corrections as time goes on. I've got it so it's loose in the bearing caps. I shouldn't say loose, but the alignment of the bearing spacers is correct, so it slides back and forth nicely. So we're gonna put some heat into this thing and get it to pull in the direction we need it to go. Okay folks, so I spent some time putting some heat into the rear end and getting it so this was towed backwards and down before. So what I've done is I've got an 1/8 of an inch gap towards the front. So I've pulled the axle tube towards the front because I am going to be welding like 18 inches across the back here, adding heat, adding shrinkage, and I got about an 1/8 of an inch here. It should pull back in. So if not, then we'll have to adjust after it's welded. So both sides are about the same. We got about an 1/8 of an inch towards the front, and hopefully once we put the back brace on, this thing will come in nice. All right, I'm gonna end it for today, and we're gonna get back at it tomorrow morning. Hi to all the women and children. Alright folks, I got a little carried away here, but what we got going on here is what Kyle from KillFab calls CAD, cardboard aided design. Made some templates, traced them out, cut them out on the bandsaw over there. And also we made the bridge for the back brace. And give you a little sneak peek of what the back brace is going to look like. So that clears the rear end housing. We got the back brace continuing all the way across, and then we have these little bridges that are going to allow the U-bolts to pass through, and then these extend on out to the axle end, and we'll weld those up. So once that's all welded up, then I'm going to strip the rear end out and get it all clean. I'll pressure wash the inside and out, and we'll put it back together. So just so you know, I'm trying to minimize the flex at the back of this differential because there's no big support going from one side to the other like a Ford 9-inch. Inside here I have tubes welded, so when you tighten the bolts down, it doesn't crush the tube and also limits the travel of the bolt. This will go on and it'll make the connection from one side to the other. There's room even for the aftermarket differential cover, about 3/4 of an inch clearance. So when I get the cast aluminum cover on here, it'll work. A little carried away. This is 3 solid days worth of fabrication. Some of the final things I'm going to do is connect these bridges from the spring perch to these pockets that I made, and I'm going to cap off the ends of these tubes with these cover plates that I made. And so I'm going to get ready to tack all this stuff in place, do my final welding. Hopefully the rear end will pull into alignment good, and then I really need to get the new parts put in this rear end and get it back in the truck. This is way too longer than I said it was going to take a long time. I've made these before. I always stress over it because it takes too long. This is the first one I've done for an 8.8 with the bridge across the back. But when it's all done, I'll really like it, and it should catch some people's eye when they look under the truck, and we'll see. All right, time to get to work. Hey folks, I got all the welding done. I got the fabrication done and welded. I welded these little stops to stop these spring perches from trying to pull off. Got my back brace in place, the bridge if you want to call it that. It's all the way done all the way across. And with all that welding on the back side, the alignment bushings fit right in. So I'm pretty happy about that. It's true on both sides. So my axles will go in nice and straight, and I won't lose any power or wear out any bearings because my axle tubes are misaligned. Alright, next step is to flush this thing out real good and start assembling it and paint it. Okay folks, I've completed the installation of the carrier bearings on both sides. I used this old bearing puller to get the old bearings off. Something I picked up at a yard sale. I knew it would come in handy someday. I've used it more times than I can count. So I'm going to go over to the housing now and do the pinion. Hey folks, I'm getting ready to change the pinion seal and the crush sleeve and flush out the rear end. And I don't have a tool to hold the pinion flange so I can get the nut off or torque it when I put it back together. So I just took some 1/4 inch plate stock. I traced out the old pinion flange and the drive shaft flange. Here, let me go get it for you. So I placed this on the 1/4 inch plate, and then I grabbed a center punch that is the same size as the hole, and I located it all and I drilled it, and I also put the pilot hole in. So there it is folks. I ended up putting a 5-foot bar on there. Just I could always cut it shorter if it wasn't necessary to be that long, but rather than have to add on to it later. And I've got my Harbor Freight breaker bar here, and I was able to easily put enough force on that without chasing the rear end around on the bench. So now I have a tool that I can use repeatedly, and it'll be in stock, and I'll bring it with us on drag week in case we ever have to knock the pinion out and put another gear set in this thing. Alright folks, so I've got my new pinion bearings inner and outer installed, new pinion nut, crush sleeve, pinion seal, and I use my handy dandy homemade pinion tool to get this to the proper torque and the right inch-pounds drag on this. So the goal now is to get the housing painted, and I'm going to put it in the truck as is, without the gear set, without the axles, like I mentioned before, just so I don't have to muscle the whole thing, and then I can use the truck basically as a workbench to get this thing put together. Hey folks, so what happened when I was changing the pinion seal and I wanted to redo the crush sleeve in the process, I noticed that the pinion had a little grumble to it. When I took it out, sure enough, the pinion bearing had some, must have picked up something and chewed it up a little bit, so I decided to replace that, the inner pinion bearing as well as the outer. This is the race for it. I don't know if you can see the hard facing is worn off. So this thing had a lot of miles on it, so it was a good idea to do it anyway. I was being cheap. I was trying to avoid spending any more money on it. And then in the same time, I noticed that the carrier bearings had some similar characteristics, just not necessarily catastrophic, but high mileage stuff. So every bearing in the rear end has been changed now, and obviously every seal will have been changed. So I just wanted to show you. I did notice that there was some problems with the bearings, so I decided to replace them all. To get the rear end together quickly, my buddies at Napa, my local Napa parts store down the road, were able to get them for me, and they were here the next day. So those bearings are all here. Most of them have been installed, and I'm going to shoot some paint on the rear end here real quick. I've got it set up on the bench to blow some paint on it, and then while that's drying, I'm going to prep the underside of the truck, and we're going to throw this thing in on the springs and then start assembling the gear set and the brakes and anything else that needs to be done. Hey folks, the rear end is in. I've got the differential cover just put on to keep the dust out of it. The inside of the truck, I kind of prepped it. I wire brushed or wire wheeled the frame rail both on the inside and out. And now I am working on the rebuilding the brake brackets and the dust shields and the emergency brake setup. Once all that's on, then I can put the axles in. Alright folks, well, we've got the driver's side all together with the caliper and pads and the axle in, and the brake line is on. I was trying a little experiment. I bought a can of paint thinking that it might match and not be bright red like some of the racers do. So, a little too vivid for my liking for this particular method of the truck, but after a few miles, get some dirt on it and it'll be just right. Alright, we're going to jump over the other side. All the parts are painted, just waiting for them to dry, and then I'm going to assemble the emergency brake and put the axle in, and the rotor and the caliper. Well, there it is folks. I got my drive shaft. I'm just about to put it in, so I'll show you with that all installed in just a moment. Alright folks, well, the rear end is in, the drive shaft is in, and I've run it on the jack on the lift here with the wheels spinning. The brakes are bled. See, the brake lines are all run. Got a brake bracket that I put in way up top there. So yeah, we're just going to throw the tires on. We're going to give it a quick once over, and we're going to go for a test drive. We'll see what happens. Well, there it is folks, it's completely done. We're back from a test drive. I just put it up in the air, bled the brakes again. Kind of some neat stuff. As I mentioned before, the drive shaft is pretty much centered in the hoop, and with the fully extended, there's still clearance to run the thing up on the jack stands. Working on getting the emergency brake cables situated. I used the factory mount for the rear brake line that's in the top of the housing, and then the brake line that goes from the chassis to the rear end, I use the Silverado 99 Silverado one for part number, and then I just ran it over and made a bracket off of the cross member to pick up the factory Mazda line. Next time on KEI Fabrication. Alright folks, what I got going on here is these are the lowering blocks, or going to be the lowering blocks for the rear end.